This is just because I had no sense of self growing up. I had no boundaries, no sense of self, anything like that, at least consciously. So I think that I still do cling to this movie a lot. Hello, and welcome to Core Memory, a podcast about movies. I am your host, Cortney Warner, and on today's episode, it's kind of a bonus episode slash introductory episode. It's just going to be me because the whole premise of this podcast is where I invite guests on to talk about the first movie they ever remember seeing and their favorite movie as an adult and any correlations between the two, if there's any, which there usually tends to be, which is really cool. And the reason why I got this idea for this podcast was because I sat down and thought about the two movies that fall in those categories for me. And I thought I would talk about them on here because might as well let you guys get to know me and all of that before we dive into all of these really cool interviews I've been doing with the guests that I've been having on. So my two movies are the first movie I ever remember seeing is Mrs. Doubtfire, the Robin Williams movie, and my favorite movie as an adult is Wes Anderson's The Royal Tenenbaums. And if you think about it, there's a lot of similarities between those two movies. And I'm going to talk about how both have affected me and what I see in the correlations between them and how they've impacted me and how I move through the world with both of those pieces of art deeply imprinting on me. So I'm going to start with Mrs. Doubtfire. Here are some stats. Mrs. Doubtfire came out in 1993, also the year that I was born, so it definitely was something that was played on a VHS, I'm sure, as a kid for me. Definitely not something I saw in theaters. Mrs. Doubtfire. Director was Chris Columbus, who also very famously directed the first two Harry Potter movies. He's done a lot of stuff, but when I put all that together, I'm like, oh, interesting. But he's done a lot of stuff in Hollywood. And the cast of Mrs. Doubtfire is absolutely stacked. It's Robin Williams, Sally Fields, Lisa Jacob, Matthew Lawrence, Mara Wilson, Pierce Brosnan, and the list goes on. So many incredibly talented people who were all like pretty iconic in the 90s as it was, all coming together to make this absolutely ridiculous comedy movie. Definitely something that probably couldn't get made today for good reason for some of the content in that movie. But I do think if they were to ever remake it, the only way they could possibly do that is to have Pedro Pascal play Robin Williams' role as Mrs. Doubtfire / Daniel Hillard. And the reason why, well, I guess I don't have a good reason as to why this is the first movie I remember seeing, other than it's just stuck with me. I think the humor really spoke to me. I think I mean, Robin Williams was very prevalent in our home growing up. You know, like Aladdin had come out, he had Hook, he had all these different movies that he was in, and Mrs. Doubtfire was definitely like the family favorite and my personal favorite as a kid growing up, for sure. I remember the first time I saw Mrs. Doubtfire, the scene where his mask, like his Mrs. Doubtfire mask, falls out the window and gets rolled over. I remember that being kind of scary as a kid. I was probably like 4 or 5 when I would say about 4 or 5 when I remember seeing this movie, and that freaked me out. But also the scene where the social worker shows up and he's like he's Daniel Hillard, but then the social worker's like, "Oh, I'd love to meet Mrs. Doubtfire." And Robin Williams has to go in and try to like put together it's the same scene where his mask falls out the window. So then he puts his face into a pie, and like wearing like a face mask, and he goes, "Oh, hello." And, that still tickles me. I remember the first big laugh I ever got, ever was on Thanksgiving, where I got some whipped cream. I believe it was some Cool Whip or something, and I snuck it out of the kitchen, out of the refrigerator, and snuck off into the bathroom. And the whole family, like extended family, was over at our house for Thanksgiving. And I was like, I'm gonna make everyone laugh. So I like covered my face in whipped cream in the bathroom and very tediously tried to make it look like the movie, where I like had it kind of stick out and stuff like that. It wasn't smooth. And then I popped out and I kind of like backed up I like walked out backwards so no one could see my face. No one was looking for me either, by the way. By the way, the kids were done eating. The adults were still sitting around eating and drinking and all of that stuff. So I like backed myself out into the dining room area where the rest of the adults were, and I turn around and I go, "Oh, hello!" And that like was I've been chasing that high ever since. I was again like 4 or 5 years old. I'm in my 30s. I don't think I've ever gotten a laugh that big ever, and I probably never will again, and that's okay, and that's where that's why I'm at where I'm at today. But I absolutely I love that. I love this movie. I think, you know, I like to have, I have questions that I ask the guests on the show too that I am gonna ask myself, not like I'm gonna talk back and forth like a soliloquy style, but so I think the way this movie affected me, it's one of the questions I like to ask the guests. I think the way this movie affected me as a kid was definitely sense of humor. I think for sure was very like wacky and zany, and it was something that was very tangible for a kid to grab onto, but also like not feeling like it was super dumbed down for kids, you know. And so I think for sure the humor of Mrs. Doubtfire and like just the zaniness is something, and of Robin Williams' comedy is something that I've carried with me ever since I've seen that movie. And even way before I got into doing stand-up, because I didn't start doing stand-up until my 20s, I think that I always kind of felt like I had like Mrs. Doubtfire and Robin Williams, like that's those sensibilities kind of intrinsically in me, and the way that I kind of operated, the way that I would like, you know, talk with people and stuff like that. I think I always subconsciously, because I definitely wasn't trying to be like a funny person or trying to be a comedian at the time. I had other creative and aspirational pursuits at the time. Comedy was definitely not something I considered up until I was older. But I think the way that I kind of moved through the world was very much affected by Mrs. Doubtfire. And then I still do love this movie. You know, again, like I said, not everything is aged super well by any stretch of the imagination. And that stuff, not okay. But I do think that it does as like a family movie, and kind of just as a ridiculous comedy. Like, what a ridiculous premise, you know what I mean? I do think it holds up. I still feel like it is something that I would, that if it came out today, obviously, like I said, a more modernized version of it, and they had Pedro Pascal play Mrs. Doubtfire, I still think like if they made some tweaks to it, it would be a hit. And so I still do enjoy this movie. Nostalgia definitely is there, because I think that I also, I tend to also like to be like, well, this is my favorite thing, and this is the thing that I remember, so this is the thing that I love. And I think the upcoming album do, but it is by far my favorite joke. When I wrote that joke, I remember, and being able to incorporate something that I love, like Mrs. Doubtfire, something that really impacted me, and being able to kind of figure out how to finesse that into the story that I was telling about my own ridiculous escapades. I was like, I remember thinking like, oh, okay, like this is the type, I wrote a joke that I like telling, and that I am proud to have written. And it is a ridiculous joke, but like the way that I structured it, it felt like it was a breakthrough for me. So Mrs. Doubtfire also very much has a impact and chokehold on me in that way too. And I still have a lot of fondness of it, and I'm thankful. You know, childhood stuff is sometimes not always like super nice, and you know, there's a lot of things that you have to work through with childhood trauma, at least a lot of people do. But I am thankful that I was exposed to a lot of movies at the time as a kid, and specifically like comedies like that. I'm very, very thankful that is the first movie I remember seeing. Like, look, I'm sure I've been shown other movies as a kid. I'm sure there were some Disney movies in there. I'm sure there was some like Looney Tunes movies or whatever kind of kid stuff thrown in there, you know. But yeah, Mrs. Doubtfire was the one that I remember, and just remembering sitting in the living room as a kid, I can just already feel like the couch and like the carpet, you know, and like all of that, and just watching it on our TV on the VHS. And I also remember as a kid not understanding how TVs and VHSs work, you know, because I remember also seeing the movie Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory and thinking like, oh, like you end up on TV because you're shrunk down as a person, and then you live inside of the TV. And I remember thinking that like Mrs. Doubtfire, all the actors and the characters were like just waiting for me to want to watch them. Very what egocentric thing something that a kid would think for sure. I'm going to move on to my favorite movie as an adult. Well, I'm going to be real. This is what I always do this. I feel like this is just who I am, but there's always like a caveat. The Royal Tenenbaums is the movie that is my favorite movie, and I've chosen that. But if I'm going to be completely honest with you, it's a pretty split even tie for favorite movie as an adult. And the other movie is David Lynch's Mulholland Drive. But for the purposes of this podcast, and also like I think both of those movies are like absolute masterpieces, and I think Mulholland Drive is possibly the best movie of the 20th century for sure. 21st century, sorry. Whatever century it was that it came out, 21st century. Anyway, it came out in the early 2000s. I think it's one of the best movies ever made, like objectively. Royal Tenenbaums definitely affected me more emotionally when I saw it, because I didn't see Mulholland Drive until I was a little bit older. I was in my 20s, and Royal Tenenbaums I had the pleasure of getting to watch in my teen years, which is something I didn't know that I needed until I saw it. And before we get into all the sentimentality of all of that, let's give some stats. So the Royal Tenenbaums came out in 2001. What a year that was. Written and directed by Wes Anderson, also co-written by Owen Wilson. Fun fact. I can't believe that Owen Wilson co-wrote one of my favorite movies of all time. That's crazy. But anyway, directed by Wes Anderson, starring, again, another absolute stacked cast. Gene Hackman, Angelica Huston, Luke and Owen Wilson, Gwyneth Paltrow, Ben Stiller, Danny Glover. And again, the list goes on and on. It's a who's who of quirky indie Hollywood at the time, And I think at the time, a lot of these actors were very much peaking in their career, or like about to peak in their career. And I remember reading kind of behind the scenes stuff where Wes had to call in a lot of favors for people to do this movie, because this was only his third feature, but probably the second one that feels more like a Wes Anderson movie, because Bottle Rocket is his first movie. And that one, if you watch it, after knowing all of Wes Anderson's filmography, you're like, Wes Anderson made this? I mean, there's some similarities there, but it definitely feels more like a regular standard movie and not like a Wes Anderson movie that what he has pioneered and made his thing as an auteur. And then obviously second movie that he made was Rushmore, with Jason Schwartzman and Bill Murray. Also fantastic, but still, definitely him figuring out what his style and what he wants to do. And I feel like Tenenbaums was right there. It's like right on the cusp of it being a Wes Anderson, like capital letters, Wes Anderson movie. You know what I mean? Because then after Tenenbaums, he did Life Aquatic, and that is just one of the great American films, in my opinion. But Tenenbaums, I remember reading and watching videos of like interviews with like Gene Hackman and Gwyneth Paltrow and people who weren't really in Wes's like sphere, as far as like obviously the Wilson brothers were already there with him with the other movies he had made, because they were also in Bottle Rocket as well, and were friends, and they were all like grew up as friends together. So they kind of got the vision. But like anybody who Wes was trying to recruit outside to be in a very low budget indie movie, by someone named Wes Anderson, who nobody really knew at the time, and couldn't really put a finger on like what he was doing as a director and as a filmmaker. Like I remember reading an interview with Gene Hackman, and he was just like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing in this movie. I don't understand it. And Wes had to like really try to negotiate with him and get him to come and do this movie, because Gene was like, I don't know what this is. I don't understand this movie. I don't understand the direction. And like, why is there so little dialogue but so many scene directions in the script and all these things? And Gwyneth Paltrow was kind of a similar situation. And she actually was, she was dating Luke Wilson at the time, which probably she was maybe a little bit of an easier sell, given that she was already dating Luke Wilson, who was going to be in the movie. But she also was just like, what is this, basically? And it's just funny to think about, because I think that's his best. I don't know if it's his best movie objectively. It is my favorite of his by far. But the way I got into Wes Anderson too, and I shared this story at the Belcourt when I had the pleasure of presenting before Life Aquatic, was growing up, my mom, who still I believe is a fan of Criminal Minds, watched it all the time, all the procedural crime shows on TV. Wasn't a lot of other stuff going on for us to watch, and I was homeschooled, so I was always just home, Obviously, that's the point of... Anyway, you get it. And Criminal Minds was always on, and I was just like, I didn't really care about the show too much at the time, but I remember when I got into like being like, 11, 12, 13 years old, hitting puberty basically, I thought Matthew Gray Gubler, who played Spencer Reed on Criminal Minds, was really cute. Like I'd say he's probably my first celebrity crush. For sure. Also, I wasn't exposed to a lot of other people. No, maybe David Bowie, because I saw a photo of him, and that felt almost scandalous, and I have loved him ever since. R.I.P. Anyway, but probably the more tangible one, or like one that I could conceptualize more, was Matthew Gray Gubler. And we had just gotten a family computer around that time, and so I took to the internet, and I was like, just Googled Matthew Gray Gubler, Criminal Minds, whatever, to see what else he was in. And I saw he was in this movie called The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou, and I was just like, I don't know what this is, but I like the bright colors, and I like that they were all on a submarine. Didn't know who Wes Anderson was, didn't know anything about what was going on. So I remember going to the library, and I had my own library card at the time. I went there with my family, and I found the DVD of it, because at the time DVDs, were still popping off. Found the DVD of it. Used my own library card, went up and got it, and then stuffed it under my shirt because I didn't want any. I didn't feel like I would have been allowed to have had it, because I think it's rated R anyway. So don't think I would have been allowed to have taken that home freely. And so I waited until my mom took my brother to swim lessons, and then I took his portable PlayStation. I don't even know what number, like PS2 or whatever. It was like a portable one. He often played like Stuart Little skateboarding on there for some reason. That was his thing. But I figured out it played DVDs, and so I snuck it out, and I like popped in the DVD, laid under the covers of my bed, and watched it, and tried to watch it before my family got home. And that was my first time ever seeing a Wes Anderson movie, and it blew my fucking mind. I still I have such a fondness for Life Aquatic. And then I kind of went down the rabbit hole of like trying to find the other Wes Anderson movies, because I could only get whatever was at the library at the time. So, and I was trying to be discreet about it too. So I would like covertly go up to the counter and ask like, hey, do you have Rushmore, or do you have, whatever. At the time, I think Darjeeling Limited had just come out too, or around that time. So yeah, a lot of those movies were out, and I was like trying to covertly, borrow them from the library. And then I finally came across Tenenbaums. And that was, oh my God, that movie was a game changer for me. Also, audience, I'm assuming if you're listening to this, you probably have some inkling on who I am and my whole deal. If you don't, I was homeschooled, very super religious and conservative, and also was adopted and into a white family, and I am not white. Anyway, so now you're all caught up, and I am a lot of my comedy, including my new album coming out, grapples with that identity crisis all the time. And at the time, I never really seen, well, to be honest, I didn't really see a lot of Asian people as leads or anything in movies, and there's still none in Royal Tenenbaums. So what I'm getting to is that I also, up until this day, really, I really haven't seen any kind of adoption representation in any kind of in media that wasn't played off as a one-bit joke or a throwaway, or just not really acknowledged after anything, and seeing the character Margot Tenenbaum as she was, and it was a part of her character, her background, that she was adopted into this family and was very much reminded of that growing up, very much othered by her father and just in general, by everyone else. Her siblings seemed like her two brothers didn't seem like they cared too much, but it's just really, it really spoke to me, because people like to criticize Wes's movies as, oh, they're caricatures, they're not real people, whatever. I feel that Margot Tenenbaum is an excellent representation of how an adopted person feels and reacts and moves through the world. I wouldn't say that I'm verbatim how she behaves in that movie, but I do think I just see her disconnect with her family, and that desire for connection and for intimacy and all of that stuff, but also being very closed off and secretive. Because innately, when you're adopted, something that people don't love addressing, but is true, is that you are immediately from birth, you're rejected, and that's something that either you process that on your own in therapy or whatever, or subconsciously that weight is on you forever. And watching that movie, and I don't think I was projecting too much onto that character when I was watching it. I just was watching it and just blown away that I'm like, yeah, I absolutely relate to every single thing. How her motives and how she moves through the world and all of those things, and kind of the why is definitely very relatable to me. And that changed my life. It was mind blowing to see that. And so I will, again, kind of like Mrs. Doubtfire, there are some things in that movie that have not aged very well. And also there's plenty of criticism to be offered to a lot of, straight white upper class male auteurs of cinema who don't have a lot of representation in their movies, race or gender or sexual orientation or whatever, so it is kind of shocking that something like this, something as radical as adoption, was being so candidly talked about. And even though, there were a few lines from Gene Hackman, who plays Royal Tenenbaum, the dad, that were probably played off to be humorous in regards to her adoption, it was never taken as a joke. It was given all the context and the character that it needed, and through Gwyneth Paltrow's incredible performance as Margot Tenenbaum. I know she has won an Oscar and stuff like that, but I think this should have been her supporting actress Oscar win, because I mean, she's a nut job. I don't know much about her other than I think she's kind of wacky and definitely was raised super rich and privileged and all that stuff. But I can never fully truly hate her or write her off or dismiss her or whatever. And also she doesn't fucking know who I am. It doesn't matter. But I will always, what I'm getting at in a roundabout way is that I will always have a fondness for her to some degree, for her portrayal of Margot, because I think if it were anyone else or anyone who was less careful, and even precious, you always hear from actors or from artists, don't be precious with your material or with what you're working on. But I think in some cases, you should be. And I get the sense that I would assume that she was, but also based on the interviews that I'd watched of her talking about her time on the movie and her developing the character and all of that stuff. So I will always hold her in regard for how beautifully she played that character and her emotional arc and everything. So yeah, I love the Royal Tenenbaums. Also, the music was amazing. Again, a lot of the music that I got, mainstream music that I got growing up, secular, I guess, as you would call, as a ex-Christian, super religious, conservative, sheltered person. The secular music that I got exposed to was through movies and TV shows. It wasn't a lot of what I listened to growing up was a lot of Christian music or church music and stuff like that, or whatever my parents wanted to listen to that wasn't that, but still also we listened to a lot of musicals and watched a lot of musicals too. So a lot of that stuff. So any kind of rock or any kind of indie or any kind of other music that I just didn't really realize existed, I got through watching movies. And Wes Anderson was for sure a director who has had an impact on my music taste as a young person and now as an adult. And I'm just forever thankful for directors who also really curate a soundtrack too, because I feel like I've talked about this in other episodes that are going to be coming out, but you don't really get really good movie soundtracks, really good movie soundtracks anymore, other than stuff that's already being a remake or whatever, but some movies like anything Wes Anderson's made, anything Tarantino's made, even David Lynch, Sofia Coppola, Greta Gerwig, any of them, I know Greta is a little more modern too, but she also, I think, does a good job curating soundtracks, and all that stuff. And I think that's just as important to have as a filmmaker. But anyway, so those are my two faves. Oh, here are my questions for myself that I ask on every show that I need to be a little bit better about that. So why is this my favorite movie? It is my favorite movie because I think the story is well told. I think it's Wes Anderson's best movie, or my favorite at the very least. And because it's right on the cusp of him about to figure out his style and what he thinks, what makes him Wes Anderson, you know what I mean? And I think this is just, I say this, and I've said this multiple times on other multiple outlets that I have expressed myself on publicly and on the internet, is that musicians, filmmakers, anyone who is right on the cusp of figuring out their thing, that their signature thing, whether it's how they write, how they direct something, whatever, that project right before they figure it out is, I think, always their best. You know what I mean? And, or if you don't know what I mean, like, I can definitely, hey, hit up the podcast on Instagram and I'll give you a handful of recommendations on some music, on movies to show you what I mean, because, yeah, it's like slightly, it's like you see the vision, but there's still some elements there that aren't quite there yet, either due to budget or to whatever kind of constraints or whatever. And I often think those are the best projects, and I live by that. So, yeah, this is my favorite movie, for so many reasons, and I will love it until the day that I die. My first time seeing it was very unceremonious. It was, again, another one of those situations where I, like, at the time, I think by the time I got to see Tenenbaums, I did have, like, my own little, like, DVD player in my room that I had, like, a really tiny little one. And so I snuck it and I watched it again under, like, a blanket with headphones on, plugged into the TV so no one could hear what I was up to. And yeah, and I just still have that fond memory of being in my childhood bedroom, watching that on a tiny little TV. And, you know, I remember thinking, I still think this, like, oh, it would have been amazing to have seen this in theaters. You know what I mean? So always thankful that, like, places will do re-releases of things in theaters. Any correlations between the two movies, between Mrs. Doubtfire and Tenenbaums? Yes, there are. The plots are pretty similar in my opinion, because Mrs. Doubtfire, dad, also father of 3 kids, also similar with Tenenbaums, 3 kids, but father who is estranged from the family, isn't allowed to see the kids, whatever, comes up with a plan to, like, be around the kids and spend time with the family instead of just being fucking honest, I guess. And so that was Mrs. Doubtfire. You know, Robin Williams dresses up as a woman, is a nanny for the family. And then Tenenbaums, same deal. Like, Royal is completely estranged from his family. His family fucking hates him. But the thing is that all the kids are adults in Tenenbaums versus in Mrs. Doubtfire. But he decides to lie and say that he's dying, that he has cancer. So the family welcomes him back in, and all the kids move back into the childhood home, and they spend time together and whatever. And then it comes out that he was lying, and then everything kind of, all the fallout from all of that. So the plots are surprisingly very similar, which is funny. And again, this is why I thought this would be a good idea for a podcast. But other correlations too, I think, is just really emphasizing, you know, just very family oriented, but also how dysfunctional families can be, but how still you can come together and, like, work through that dysfunction. And I think everyone, deals with that to some degree with their families. So I also really appreciate that, and as a correlation. And also I think, you know, I think they're just very much products of their time too. I feel like, you know, Mrs. Doubtfire, and they're not, I mean, they're almost 10 years apart. I think 8 years apart total, from Mrs. Doubtfire to Tenenbaums, but they are, I think, products of their time, for sure. They feel like watching a time capsule a little bit when you watch both of those movies, even though Wes is a little more fantastical with his set design and everything. It still feels like early 2000s, you know? And then what are my last couple of questions for myself? Oh, so this is one I like to ask the audience, or not the audience, I like to ask my guests, is that if you could recast both movies with only the Muppets, except for one human being actor, or one normal character, who would you keep? And for Mrs. Doubtfire, for sure keep Robin Williams. I mean, I also just like the idea of a bunch of puppets, like, helping him make him, you know, dress him in drag and all that stuff. And also the kids being puppets would be Sally Field, would be Miss Piggy. It would be so funny. I think that would be awesome. And then for Tenenbaums, I would keep Ben Stiller as Ben Stiller. He's Chaz Tenenbaum. He's the oldest brother in the movie. I would keep him, and then everyone else around him would be a Muppet, because he is the most, like, high-strung, anal, anxious character, with good reason. I don't want to, if you want to go watch the movie, definitely go watch the movie, but he, like, is dealing with a lot of grief and loss, and he takes it out on his kids and the rest of his family by being hyper anxious and a hypochondriac, for sure. And so I think that would be really interesting and funny to watch him react to Muppets around him. And finally, my favorite, or my go-to snack and drink at the movie theater. I'm going to be real. I asked this question to all my guests, and I realized that I'm a bit of a fraud by asking this, because I don't like eating when I'm at the movie theater. I'll eat if I'm watching a movie at home, but if I'm at the theater, I don't like to eat because I don't want to hear myself chew. And also I feel like going to the theater is very like, I'm not religious anymore, but it does feel very religious to me. Like some people go to church, you know what I mean? Or whatever. And I go to the movie theater. And, but I do, and with that being said, my go-to drink is a glass of red wine, possibly 1 to 3 glasses of red wine during a movie, if possible. Occasionally a beer, not much of a soda drinker. I'll get an icy if I'm going to like a Regal or an AMC or something. I'll get like a small icy because those are still ginormous, you know. But yeah, definitely not a snack person when it comes to going to a movie in the theater. But yeah, definitely will partake in a drink or two. And yeah, well, that's about all I have for me. You know, this is a fun little bonus episode I get to put out in tandem with the premiere, and I hope this helps you get to know me a little bit more and like kind of the motivation behind why I'm doing this podcast. You know, not that anyone ever needs a motivation to do a podcast, as we all can see in the way that the world works, but I'm really excited to put out this podcast in general. Something I've been trying to work on and want to make for the longest time, and it's finally happening. I'm very excited. So Core Memory, if you're listening to this, it means that this series premiere, this episode, and then my very first episode with the guest has dropped on everywhere you listen to your podcast. And again, thank you. And I hope that you will continue on this journey with me, and a journey of conversation and self-discovery and just talking about and just getting to nerd out and talk about movies. Like, come on. It's a pretty sweet gig. Again, thank you so much, guys. And hopefully you'll listen again soon. This has been Core Memory, a podcast about movies, and I'm your host, Cortney Warner. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Please feel free to like and subscribe on anywhere that you get your podcasts. Would absolutely love the support on there. If you enjoyed today's episode and any of our other episodes, also we are on Instagram at Core Memory Pod. Please feel free to give us a follow on there as well if you want any behind the scenes tidbits or any kind of fun visuals on there. And again, thank you for listening, and we hope that you'll listen again soon.